So we'll get started today. I want to welcome everyone. I hope everyone's having a happy Thursday. The weekend is around the corner, and so many old faces, new faces, students, friends, so many incredible people like Sid, who just turned his video on. So welcome everyone. It is so great to see you all. So today we have a very, very special conversation. And for those of you who have attended many of our, Rad Reads events or me talking, there's this element of come for the productivity and stay for the existential, right? What does kind of radical introspection or self-inquiry look like? Because, I am of the belief that, whether you want to have more time or you want to be more productive or you want financial independence, retire early, these are actually not about those questions. They're actually much bigger, deeper, amorphous, sometimes scarier questions that linger behind wanting more time or wanting more autonomy. There's something there. And for those of you who don't know me, and I will introduce my friend Andrew, I'm the creator of Rad Reads, which is an online education company with a blog, a newsletter, online courses around this intersection. Our mission is to help people lead a more productive, examined, and joyful lives. And the reason why why this all relates is because a huge part in my personal journey of this introspection and this existential awareness comes from my teaching, my coaching, however you want to describe it, my philosophizing. That's how Andrew calls it, with my friend Andrew. And I came to Andrew, probably four years ago. I had just left BlackRock. I was on this kind of uncertain trajectory of being a new entrepreneur. But it'd be actually funny to hear Andrew describe it if it's suitable, but I was very anxious. I was put a lot of pressure on myself. I had a raging inner critic. I was always in a rush. My mind was just kind of scattered all over the place, 1,000,000 miles an hour. And maybe if I could distill it now in hindsight, I just wasn't content. I had a very good life. I was very financially secure. I had a lot of freedoms and all that, but I wasn't at peace with myself. And Andrew and I have embarked on this magical journey. We converse every month for 4 months for 3+ hours, and it's absolutely changed my life in so many ways: my business life, my family life, my marriage, my spiritual, my inner life. And so I really wanted to have Andrew speak about, how he approaches these conversations. He has carte blanche to reference anything, anything that's in my closet of skeletons. But a lot of it would come back to this question of scarcity. There's not enough. And I asked this question on Twitter earlier. What is there? Fill in the blank. There's not enough. And obviously, there was a lot of funny answers, like, there's never enough, ... Some of the funnier answers: avocados, queso, dark chocolate, Arcade Fire concerts. But the most common answer was time. There's never enough time. Love was on that list. Money was on that list. And so there's this belief that there's never enough X, never enough time, never enough money, never enough opportunity. And it's a paralyzing set of beliefs. I've been paralyzed by those beliefs for so long, and I'm slowly starting to see the light. And so part of my personal transformation has been because of my relationship and these teachings from Andrew. So with that, I will pass it along to Andrew, who's got a few prepared remarks. We'll do a podcast style Q&A, and then we'll close out with a meditation.
Well, beautiful introduction. Thank you very much, my friend. And it's lovely to see all of you here today. So I do have some prepared remarks in the form of a talk. The essential assumption is that we're going to be looking at the problem from the wrong angle. So I'm going to give you a completely different approach to the matter at hand. So let's begin. By my lights, the central question to be posed is the following. What is it that gives rise to the scarcity mindset in the first place? The answer will be pretty far afield from what you might anticipate. The starting point for our inquiry will be the preeminence of self-knowledge. So let me just give you a few opinions, or as part of a very larger historical survey about why self-knowledge is preeminent. The Oracle of Delphi in ancient Greece famously said, "Know thyself." That's how it's translated. In one of the oldest extant pieces of literature, the Rig Veda from India, we find that self-knowledge is key to the ultimate quest in life. Or consider the Prophet Muhammad, who said, "Whosoever knows thyself knows thy Lord." Again, whosoever knows thyself knows thy Lord. And even in the modern period, as we turn to Immanuel Kant, who was a famous proponent of the German Enlightenment, we have there a motto in one of his early essays. The motto is sapere aude, in the Latin meaning dare to know, or it could be translated as dare to be wise. This is not going to convince you, but it does give you initial flavor for the possibility that self-knowledge is not something that's well downstream, rather it's always already upstream. Therefore, the fundamental questions that come in the form of self-knowledge are most succinctly put, who am I? Or what does it mean to know myself? Or, and how do I come about knowing myself at all or in the first place? Now, this brings me to the second point in this talk, namely that there's a hindrance right at the outset when it comes to coming to self-knowledge. And that hindrance, though I won't speak about this at great length in my opening remarks, would be the outward going tendencies of the mind. That is, if you meditate, for example, what you find is that the mind itself has a tendency to go outward, and I'll describe that in just a moment. Self-knowledge is a turning back around to look at the subject of every sentence. So let's look at this more closely. Suppose it were the case that you had the thought or the feeling, I am nervous or sad. Well, notice where the focus immediately goes. The focus goes on to the nervousness or the sadness, and from there, it goes into problem solving. I don't want to be sad, and therefore if I do this or that, I won't be sad any longer. Or I don't wish to be nervous, and therefore maybe there is some kind of approach or strategy or technique that will ensure that I'm not nervous. Notice what has happened, though. We haven't inquired into the subject. Who is nervous? Who is it that's sad? Who says that she's nervous? Who believes that he is sad? The question, in short, is not arising. Who is it? Who is behind all this? And so what we see time and again, the outward going movement of the mind is a twofold gesture. One, a focus on process, focus on walking rather than the walker. A focus on planning rather than the one who's planning. And we see a focus on objects, broadly understood. Let me give you an analogy here to try to bring this point home from the great Ramana Maharshi, one of the marvelous teachers of the 20th century in India. He said, imagine that we're looking around this room and it's been filled up with light. So maybe lights have been turned on in the room. I'm going to quote him for a moment. He says, we are so engrossed with the objects or appearances revealed by the light that we pay no attention to the light itself. That is, to the source from which all the effervescence, all the effulgence, all the luminosity comes. I want to read that just once more, because you need to extrapolate from this analogy to your own life. We are so engrossed with the objects or appearances revealed by the light that we pay no attention to the light itself. So much for the beginning. Now you might ask, well, that's very interesting and nice. but I only have so much time.
Beautiful.
It's beautiful. It's all very
Like,
beautiful.
what do I do?
Yeah,
What's the takeaway?
what's the point here? So let me illustrate this by appealing to the scarcity mindset. This is understood, as Khe pointed out, in terms of there not being enough. So the statement that's commonly said is, there is not enough. I would specify this to say, this is not enough. Right? Now we have a number of candidates we've heard about when it comes to this not being enough, including money, time, completion of tasks, number of accomplishments, number or kind of achievements. Next would be presence, or that is being present, love or generosity, etc. A next set of thises could be space, in reference to how large your house is, or if you're in New York City, how large your apartment is. Opportunity or opportunities. And then there's another category referring to experiences, as when people speak of FOMO. Or we can appeal to creative output. This is not an exhaustive list, but it gives you a sense of the range of what can feel as if it's not enough. So what has happened here, though? Scarcity mindset has arisen, and there's a focus on the object. And the object is time or money, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's a focus on problem solving. How can I have more money? How can I have more time, et cetera, et cetera. So the very process I was describing above in a more theoretical way comes to roost in a more practical way here. In other words, what goes unasked is, for whom is this not enough? And if that seems like a bit of a loosey-goosey question, just consider the possibility that any number of people in your situation might not find that there's not enough time. Right? A mere thought experiment could reveal the possibility that John or Jane, were he or she in your situation, would not feel the same way. So there must be something that's gone unexamined here. What is unexamined is the one for whom it is said not to be enough. Said differently, in this sort of I think you see my trick. If you haven't seen my trick yet, here's the trick. Take a popular subject. I'm going to give you my playbook, as Khe would say. Take a popular subject like the scarcity mindset. Show that it's the ordinary approaches like self-help and other forms of problem-solving tactics will fail. I haven't done that yet, but I could. Reveal that it's actually a philosophical subject in disguise, and begin philosophizing. So that's where we're at. To resume, the scarcity mindset, I would suggest, basically indicates that I do not know myself. I want to repeat that. The scarcity mindset basically assumes and indicates that I do not know myself. For if I were to know myself, it would follow that I would not believe and feel that there's something scarce here, nor would I believe or feel that there's something abundant here. Scarcity and abundance would both dissolve. So it goes. So let's suppose that you are following me so far. I want to then begin to take us on an inquiry, which will be what we end with today. So the first step of the inquiry is to realize that in the context of scarcity, there's always a positing of a certain kind of somebody that I'm aspiring to be. Very loose language, but I think you get it. I must posit or claim or believe that I am a certain kind of somebody, or that I'm trying to be a certain kind of somebody. So we'll take Khe as our test case, early Khe, middle Khe. So what kind of somebody might that be? Let's say trying to be a successful solopreneur at an earlier stage in rat reads, right? Or trying to be the good parent, if you want to take yourself or someone else. So I want you to ask that question in a short while. What kind of somebody am I trying to be? Now you might ask, well, how does this relate to scarcity? Well, the question of trying to be a certain kind of somebody reveals one step back that I have a sense of lack. In other words, if I'm trying to be somebody, that already presupposes one step upstream that I am lacking in some way or another. For example, if I felt insignificant, I am insignificant. One way of trying to prove that I am not insignificant is by being a successful solopreneur. So notice, I keep trying to be a certain kind of somebody. I walk one step back and ask, what is it that's lacking in myself? I need to stipulate what that is, what I've been struggling with for quite some time. So I'm worthless, I'm loveless, and so on and so on. These are candidates. I'm fundamentally alone, and therefore I must always try to be the kind of person who is worth being around other people.
I'm insignificant.
Mm-hmm.
I'm insignificant being another one.
Mm-hmm. Certainly. And so the last part of the inquiry, which we'll do together, is the following. In the absence of trying to be somebody, and in the absence of any sense of lack, who am I? That's a question I want you to sit with. It's a very commonly asked question. But it basically suggests that the scarcity mindset is itself a product of trying to be somebody, as well as a product of lacking something within myself or believing that's true. And therefore, without these two, there is no scarcity. Why? Because scarcity presupposes a lack of wholeness. If there's only wholeness, completeness, there can be neither scarcity nor abundance. There's just contentment or peace or happiness. So in the concluding bit of this very short talk, I want to revisit the central question. Remember, the central question was, what is it that gives rise to the scarcity mindset in the first place? What these wisdom traditions say broadly, and this is the line of inquiry I'm following, is that ignorance or lack of knowledge, specifically lack of self-knowledge, is what gives rise to the scarcity mindset. Narrowly put, what gives rise to this mindset is a sense of lack that begets or produces the attempt to be somebody, which itself is often felt as a kind of seeking or restlessness. I like to quote the Rolling Stones here, I can't get no satisfaction. So that's what it kind of looks like when you start to examine it well downstream. I just can't seem to get any satisfaction. Where is that from? I have to be somebody. Where is that from? I'm lacking. And without lack, who am I? So that's all I have for the opening. Thanks very much for listening.
Wow. It feels like a little mic drop TED Talk moment right there. Well, thank you for that. And amidst 3 hours of talking for 4 years, so 16 times 3, like 48 hours of having these conversations, I still always learn something new and something new about myself. And so I was thinking I could ask you a few questions, maybe as the gatekeeper of, not gatekeeper, but the representative of the high performing, ambitious solopreneur who used to work on Wall Street and is overburdened by the demands of modern parenting, as that archetype, and kind of talk through some of these questions. So something that, so I think one that will really resonate is time, right? There's not enough time. And so I go through, going through my day, and the minute I wake up, there's, 17 tasks that I want to do, right? Mm-hmm. And then I go and I see my kids and my wife, and then there's, 5 more demands of parenting and showing up, and we're out of the diaper changing, but meal prep, lunch prep, and so on. And then I open my email, and then there's, direct reports that, I'm the bottleneck to all of that. Mm-hmm. And that seems just like an average day. Drop into the chat if there's some relatability into that. And so for me, the first thought that comes to my mind is, well, if there was just more time, then I could do those 17 things. I wouldn't be rushed to get my kids to school, and then I could be present and a good, boss and manager. And so if I go back to, that's the product of wanting to be somebody. And that implies that by definition, there's something that I lack, right? By the desire to be somebody. And so let's take, in my shoes, I want to be a loving father and husband. Okay? That's one. And I would like to be, I guess, or I could already see how it's leaky, but I want to be a successful business person.
Okay.
Right. And I might, put a few little asterisks there where it's like, I'm not particularly motivated by money. It's probably more status. Like I want to be recognized and I want people to say like, oh, Khe did that thing. It was quite hard. It's hard to, bootstrap a one-person business to X. And so those might be, we haven't factored in my hobbies. I surf every day, and I'd like to be a respectable surfer, right? And in all these things, I will say, and I would love to be challenged on this, but I will say, I just love the process. I just love surfing, and I love the feeling of improvement or growth, or the satisfaction of overcoming a challenge. In isolation, none of these seem particularly bad. Being a good parent, overcoming challenges, yet these attributes, to use your lens, they are definitely somebodiness, the desire to be a somebody. And I can absolutely see how they lead to scarcity. So where do I go from there?
Okay. Well,
that was a lot.
No. So let's begin the following way. Let's suppose it were the case that someone were generous. That person had cultivated the virtue of generosity. We don't need to ask that person, do you have the desire to be generous? As a matter of fact, that one just is generous. Therefore, there's no identity the person is clinging to when it comes to generosity. When the situation requires, that one is just generous. When the situation does not require, there's no question of generosity. It's null and void. So we don't need to add on any desire to be so-and-so or such and such in order to husband, if I may use a verb, right? Or to surf, or to business, to use a made-up verb. Business, businesses, surf, surfs, and husbanding, husbands, right? That might sound a little bit weird in our ears, but none of these things require any kind of desire. Desire is always born of lack, just as trying is always born of lack. So if the objection that might come from some people is, well, what's wrong with wanting to be a good husband? The whole point is that you have abstracted yourself from just husbanding, as is required in husbanding situations, and you've tried to be something or other. As a brief aside, I would say anyone who says, I want to try to work in my relationship is, I can tell you from experience, is already making a huge mistake conceptually. Just relationship. Don't try to work on it. Don't try to love someone. Just be loving. Right? So there's a whole level of abstract identification that's getting us into a lot of trouble, which is giving rise to, I don't have enough time in order to be a good husband, nor do I have enough time in order to be a successful businessman. So you just begin by investigating and dropping these false identities. But if you don't, then you need to go one more step back, according to the argument provided here, and see that if every desire is born of lack, then the question is, what is lacking? So I guess I'd ask that of you, Khe. What is it that appears to be lacking in order to want to try to be a good husband, a respectable surfer, and a successful businessman?
So what is lacking? I would say, well, if I try to look at them in each category in isolation, I would say with business, there is a starting point where I'm not sure the business is going to make it. Mm-hmm. Right. So I don't want to say, survival, right? Or the base level of Maslow's hierarchy, right? Food and shelter. But there's some element of it, which is, well, if I don't business well, then I'm not able to, provide. So that would be one with business. And I think that would be a very common one when people work very hard and they'll say, well, I want to provide for my family, or I want to give my kids the most opportunity. I want to set them up for success. I want them to be happy, right? And so the vehicle, the vehicle becomes work or doing, and that's the end goal. I didn't really talk about the lack, but maybe we could infer the lack from that. Should we pause there? Should I go through the different categories?
So I lack as provider, say something like that.
I lack as I would say it feels a little more primal, right? As survival. Provider has this more, distinguished feel to it. But I've worked with many kind of people with 7, 8, 9 figures in their bank accounts, and they still are afraid of not being able to provide the kind of the other shoe to drop, whatever that means for someone with 9 figures, but the other shoe to drop.
Okay, I follow that. What about the next one?
So parenting. I want to be a good parent. I think the lack is, I want people to know that I'm a good person. And so when people give me bad feedback on our course, I get very hurt. Not because of the words per se, but the implication that I was dishonest or not good. Right? When someone asks for a refund for the course or sends a critiquing or trolling email to Rad Reads, I'm like, oh, they must think I'm an asshole. Mm-hmm. And I think the lack would be the lack of confidence or self-knowledge to be, steadfast in my conviction that I am not a bad person. But I want to know.
Or rather, yeah, I think I would drop both. It's that I'm neither. I don't have to stand by the idea any longer of having to be a good person or worrying them a bad person. Now, I don't mean to make some kind of unethical remark here. It's not that at all. It's rather that when someone is simply acting well in a seamless way, there's really no question about being a good person or not being a good person. The thought doesn't have to arise.
Doesn't that though? How do you avoid sidestepping into complete apathy and nihilism? Where it's like, well, if there's no good and no bad, it just is. It's just like, well, what's the point? I'm just not going to care.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm an ethicist, so I'll take that question up. Sure. I didn't say that there's no good or no bad. What I said is that one doesn't have to take oneself. It's called a second order thought. You can be kind without thinking, I'm a kind person. It's called a second order thought. It's what one late philosopher, Bernard Williams, called one thought too many. It's entirely unnecessary, and frankly, it's self-centered, right? You just be kind when kindness is warranted. Be loving when loving is warranted. I'm a virtue ethicist. That is, virtue itself is demonstrated in and through the virtuous act that is done right now, the proper virtuous act in this context. I don't have to stand back and pat myself in the back or vilify myself and say, oh, I mustn't have been a very good person, or I need to be a better person. I need to improve myself in such a way that, no, just as Nike once said, just do it, right? Just act virtuously. Acting virtuously doesn't imply a sense of excess or a sense of lack. Therefore, it can't imply this samsaric, this endless suffering attempt to be this person or that person, what Ram Dass calls the somebody game. That whole game falls apart. It doesn't have any legs to stand on.
And I guess the thing that occurs in that is maybe the real question is, I don't know what it means to, I don't know what good means.
Well, that's a great question. Philosophizing.
Right. And I think that in this kind of, I think that strikes me as a much harder and more vaster question to tackle. And I can see why the identity becomes much more helpful, because it's like, oh, well, that person's good. And so, that's goodness in the flesh, and it's imitative. I can copy it. There isn't a question there, but almost hard and a flash of where I saw this all come together, where you started with the scarcity mindset arises from not knowing oneself.
Certainly.
And so what clear example of not knowing oneself is not knowing what is good.
Certainly. Certainly.
And but yes, I know that everyone on this call is like, God damn, there are, millions of pages have been written about that topic. Like, how am I going to figure, how am I going to figure this out? And lo and behold, I don't have time to figure this out, right?
Well, what we defined is that the one clue to this conversation is just to see that a lot of things have to be taken for granted in order to say, I don't have enough time. So you have to take for granted, I won't get too deep here, but you have to take for granted that you know what time is. You have to assume that time is such as to pass, that there's a future state of affairs or a set of future state of affairs that somehow or another manifests itself in a particular concrete present that you're living right now. That concrete present, being very finite, somehow slips into the past, which you only have access through recording devices like Zoom recording or through memory. That's a picture of time. Is that correct? It's worth investigating. Not every philosophical position has argued in favor of that. But if you believe that time is flowing inexorably, speeding by, if you believe, as a number of conversation partners do, that I'm always behind, I'm behind my peers, time is antagonistic, I can never quite catch up. You have a set of metaphors, you can't
conquer time.
Can't quite, yes. Then you have these are important matters to consider. Your very assumptions are the ones that are causing you to suffer. As Wittgenstein once said, a picture held us captive. You're held captive by a picture of what time is. Similarly, you're held captive by a conception of who you are. Right? I, for example, you might say to yourself, I'm someone who wishes to be and needs to be quite accomplished during this lifetime in various and sundry ways. Well, is that correct? So the scarcity mindset is nothing but a very interesting itch or symptom or sign that there's a whole lot of things upstream that need to be considered. And when you do, it's really quite astonishing, because what the traditions often say is that self-knowledge actually affords one peace or happiness or contentment. I don't feel the scarcity mindset. I wish we had more time in an ordinary sense to discuss these matters today. I know we have very little time in the ordinary sense, but I have no sense of a scarcity mindset, not because I'm special, but because these things have been resolved.
So what would you say? I know there's a lot of entrepreneurs here, and the entrepreneur, you know, they don't have product market fit. They've taken a risk. They're taking a personal pay cut. They are trying to support, 10 employees where they're not sure if they can make payroll, in the next 6 months if they don't raise a Series A. Okay. So that person is overcome by scarcity often. There's not enough time. I think I know how I would inquire with that person, but where would you start the inquiry with someone that, has poured everything into a career? And again, the aspiration, part of the aspirations are noble, not noble, but they are a genuine fear that if they don't figure it out, they're going to have to lay off 10 people, right? And so that, how do you start? How should that person start the inquiry?
I don't know enough about that person to be able to say, but I can tell it's a nice case study, but I don't actually have a sufficient number of
data points.
Data points yet to begin. But I'll tell a story.
I like side stories. Andrew's a philosopher, and I'm a left brain internet finance. So anytime he speaks in economic terms, it gets me excited.
I'll try to throw in some opportunity costs here. See if I can add optionality to the Sufi story. It's a Sufi story that I'll tell instead. So this guy is going on his camel to meet his teacher. He's heard that his teacher is up in yonder tent or something like that. So he travels by camel to the teacher, and then he, in a hurry, gets off the camel and goes into the tent and says, "Oh, I'm here, my teacher. And it's so wonderful to see you." And the teacher peers out through the tent and says, "Your camel, it's not tied up." And the student looks back and says, "Oh, well, Allah, God will take care of that." And the teacher says, "Yes, God will take care of that. Now go tie up your camel." You can ponder that. It's a very, very nice, it's simple story, but it gets into some pretty weighty matters about metaphysics and theology, but the relationship between us and a larger reality. But suffice to say here, all I really mean by it is that the only thing I can say as entrepreneur, based on what little I know about him or her, is that you need to take responsibility for what falls within your ken, and then trust that things will play out however it is the case that they were meant to play out. We're missing a lot of this in secular modernity. That is a trust in something that is broader than the doings of the narrowly understood self. But that has tended to be what wisdom traditions have said. There must be some kind of broader reality upon which I can lean, into which I can turn, upon which I can trust, that is in coordination with my own responsibility. So I tie up the camel, but I also have this deep trust that, so to say, or not so to say, God takes care of it as well. So there's some people, you might at least have an intuition here when I'm talking. The intuition is that somehow there's a trust that things are and will be okay. That's not so easy to argue for. I wouldn't call it faith, but there is a deep, deep sense. So in Taoism, that would be called something like living in accordance with the Tao. There's something that supports me, so that if notwithstanding my many efforts to try to bring about success in this endeavor, if they don't come to pass, then I'm not shattered.
Yeah. And I could see that pulling in the questions of somebodiness, right? Being wanting to be somebody. The other thing that I see, and by the way, we'll take a few questions before the meditation. The other question, or the other topic that I see emerge there, is what I might call the illusory nature of control, right? Because if you don't trust, you try to control. And I would imagine that many people on the Zoom call love to control, whether, like, I have high blood pressure. Immediately, it's like, how can I control this? I have prediabetes. Immediately, like, how can I control this? And there is, I mean, in this case, it's the trust that, I don't know about it. I'm trusting things are not moving in the right direction, but there's a much bigger metaphysical question around that. But I know that personally, and maybe I'm speaking on behalf of our listeners, our participants today, our friends, that accepting that there's not as letting go of control, or letting go of the illusion that I can control these outcomes, whether I'm that entrepreneur, or whether I'm a person with a medical ailment, or whether, I'm the person, trying to, become a better surfer, right? Like this element of what is within your control and what is not within your control.
I'll add one little thing and then we can open it up to questions. So Stoics, it's strange is that a number of people in the tech space and in finance have turned to what I call neo-Stoicism or modern Stoicism today. And they probably got very excited about Epictetus' Enchiridion or handbook. And the first statement there, paraphrasing but fairly close, is there are things within my control or power, or things not within my control or power. Many people get fixated on the first one, trying to stipulate what is within my control. Many people in the tech space or in finance do. They don't realize that the Stoics held to the idea that what's not within my control is up to Zeus, or up to nature, as they called it. So a big part of the ethic was couched within a metaphysics. And this is just a very sensible view, right? So they got around to the idea of amor fati. I come to love, strange to say, come to love what is not within my control. Or consider relatedly, and very brief, the Bhagavad Gita, which states you have a right to your actions, but not to the fruits of your actions. Similar line of thought. You have a right to the actions. You have a right to your intention set. You can do everything within your power to bring something to pass, but I like to use the example of an archer. So the archer can pull back the arrow. After it's released, there's a certain kind of indeterminacy. Who knows which way the winds will blow, what will happen to the weather. Maybe the target tilts a little bit before the arrow strikes it. That's not within one's control. And therefore, all there is a kind of grace or trust and an openness. And this is what Buddhists call non-attachment. There's a non-attachment to an aimed at outcome, but an outcome that may not come to pass. This is just wisdom speaking. And it's not just that it's speaking, one has to learn how to imbibe it and to embody it. And when you imbibe or embody it, it's no longer just a set of abstract statements like, oh yes, I have a right to my actions, but not the fruits of my actions. No, there's actually a very felt sense of what that's like. So that the fruits of the actions themselves are those that, while not being in my control, are somehow experienced however they need to be experienced. Things are going however it is the case they need to go. And if I may loop back to the topic before we turn to questions, this does not have any sense of scarcity. Actions undertaken without any scarcity, without any abundance, without any lack, without any excess. As my car mechanic once says, it is what it is, which is very wise of him.
Mm-hmm. I love that. You have the right to to your actions, but not the fruits of your action, which is funny to see how that shows up in, self-improvement language, like, process over outcomes, right? Or in our course, embracing the atelic versus the, telic outcome orientation. It's funny, you have growth without goals, which is, Patrick O'Shaughnessy, which is kind of like being present, the power of now, right? You see this in so much of the contemporary literature, and to know that it's rooted in, sacred texts that are thousands of years old is I find that quite reassuring that people have struggled with this since for a long time. So all right, shall we open it up to questions? I might drop your questions into the chat and I'll relay them to minimize different frictions. How much time should we leave for the meditation, Andrew?
Let's say 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay, cool.
So
we got nine minutes for
exactly.
questions. So Kessie asks, So is overcoming a scarcity mindset about shifting your perspective by challenging your assumptions? Or is it overcome by getting rid of your desires somehow? Or by having trust that something greater is supporting you and everything will work out for your good, so no need to worry?
Okay.
That's a great question.
So we had three parts, but the first part was, is it a shift in perspective, or is it about dropping desire?
Challenging your assumptions.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Or getting rid of your desires. Those are
So the first part was the
shifting your perspective.
By.
Is overcoming the scarcity mindset about shifting your perspective, or by challenging your assumptions,
okay,
or by getting rid of your desires?
Okay. Well, yes, would be the kind of Groucho Marx answer. Yeah. So those all end up, they may seem like they're three separate parts, but they collapse into one. So let's start with the second one. You have to challenge your assumptions. We haven't gotten a chance, you and I, to inquire into what these assumptions particular are, but when you challenge your assumptions, that process itself bodies forth in a change of perspective. Change of perspective, though, let's take Advaita Vedanta, would be such as to reveal that there actually isn't any hungry ghost, like any kind of unfulfilled, unsatiated desire. I don't mean the desire for food when naturally hungry. I mean a raging, perpetuating desire. But if your question is like, where do I begin? Well, I try to provide a little bit of more than a little bit of a starting point. Just begin by asking yourself, and when you're very quiet with yourself, who am I trying to be? And that's very easy to see because you'll just keep perpetuating actions on behalf of this somebody you're trying to be. It's a very simple way to begin your inquiry. It's not just the case that, I'll just answer briefly, it's not just the case that what one is experiencing FOMO. You fear missing out. Why do you fear missing out? Because you want to have a certain kind of experience. But why do you want to have a certain kind of experience? Because you want to belong. But why do you want to be alone? Because you don't want to be alone. I can't be alone. I'm somebody who can't be alone. Well, there you go. Investigate that. Is it true?
All right. We've got some good questions. What role does comparison play? I think you kind of answered that a little bit, right? When you ask, who am I trying to be? And I actually might merge that with what David asked.
Okay.
Focus on the process. You've said to focus on the process, not the result. Where I find the friction here is that most of us, this is good, juicy. Most of us are choosing to exist in an outcome-oriented world and society. Herein lies the challenge.
What's the challenge?
Well, the challenge is to the challenge is to basically let go, focus on the process and not the result. But our society rewards results or outcomes. So how do you reconcile living in a society?
But that's why it wasn't a cheeky question. It was a genuine
Yeah.
question. Genuine question I posed a moment ago.
Mm-hmm.
So the presupposition is that I am a certain kind of social animal. I am a certain social being. That's who I am. Investigate that. Is that what I am? I'm a social being who lives in a particular society and therefore is influenced or coerced or nudged into acting in certain ways. Investigate it. It's not so. What's great about philosophy is that we have a series of figures who didn't actually believe that was true. Socrates is one such, but Diogenes the Cynic was another. Many of them came to different conclusions about how to live, conclusions that were orthogonal common sense, and they stood by them. It doesn't really take as much courage as you think. It just takes honesty and a commitment to some genuine self-inquiry.
which is,
if our society were a wonderful place to live, then we wouldn't be seeing quite as much suffering as we do.
and I might piggyback onto David's question, because I could see, let's take a topic like homeschooling, right? Where before COVID, where I don't know if it's taboo, but it's very uncommon in the West, in the US. And so if you homeschool and then you try to take your child to a play date, or you meet someone at the, the local birthday party, and someone would say, well, what are you doing about their socialization? Right? That's the number one critique of homeschooling. Like how will your kids learn to be social animals? And so what I hear in David's question is that we're expected that our kids be social because of the social landscape that we live in. And I guess what I'm hearing, and maybe David went off mute, is like, can I opt out of that? Right? Am I allowed? Am I punished? What would come to mind is, I'm punished if I opt out of this construct. Or go for it, David.
For at least 5 years, this has been what I have been exploring, this question of, I think Andrew caught me at the word hello beginning around, it's about self-exploration. Because what I found, lacking self-exploration and getting really tight with that, we're influenced by everything around us, which says, well, study, but you got to get the good grades so that you then get into the good school. And, then you're in the job, you got to have the answer to get promoted. And it's all outcome oriented if you just let yourself be lost in the flow of, today's, sort of outcome oriented society. It's the only thing I've found is what you mentioned, Andrew, working hard on working hard on getting grounded in, for me, values, what's who I am, what's important. It's easier said than done. The point, Khe, is just that if we watch what's around us, that river just goes real fast.
So so a lot of the I'm interested in kind of convergence of understanding from a set of wisdom traditions, and many of them just speak about the difference between living, let us say, unconsciously or living consciously. So I'll quote Gurdjieff, who was a 20th century mystic. So this is going to be an old-fashioned language, just bear that in mind. You can modify the language according to current standards. So he says, man lives in a dream. He is a machine. He is asleep. So there's an invitation there. It sounded very Socratic in its own way. Either one can live in a dream, as it were, can live as if one is asleep, can live like a machine, or one can begin the process through self-inquiry of waking up to what all this is about and to who one really is. And as one begins that process of waking up to who one truly is and what it is all about, one discovers that there is a greater constitutional strength that enables one not to be flippant, but not to be caring one way or the other about what is here being called an outcome-oriented society. So I like the Christian line, one can be of the world, but not in the world. One participates, but in a way that no longer suggests that one is committed to the sorts of things other people are committed to. One is not a hermit. I'm not a hermit, but one is equanimous in the language of Buddhism. One is not buffeted this way or that way. Why? Because one has found deeper answers to life's deepest questions and is rooted in those answers. And it provides deep, deep peace of mind, as well as great clarity. So I'm aware of the time, so maybe we
Yes.
should turn to a very short meditation. Would that be okay with everyone?
Let's do it.
Okay. So it might be easiest if everyone just turns off your cameras. I'll leave mine on, just so you don't feel self-conscious in any way. We have 3 minutes, so this is going to be a very, very short meditation. It's a discursive meditation. So just close your eyes and sink into the felt sense. There's not enough. I want you to actually feel that in your body somewhere. This is not enough. Something is not enough. There's not enough time, money, resources, opportunities. Feel that there is not enough. Feel the grip of all that. And then begin the inquiry with me. Gently listen. Just listen. Allow yourself to listen to this question and to open up your heart to it. Don't answer intellectually. Well, who is it? Very gently, listen in. Who is it that I am trying to be? What is this somebody that I'm trying to be and have been trying to be for quite some time? What kind of somebody is gripping me, as it were? Allow that answer, it will probably be a single word or two to settle in. And then walk one step back with me. Okay? So, essentially, how is this somebody compensating for a sense of lack? Let me ask that question more directly. Listen very closely. What is this sense of lack? The believed, perceived, or felt sense of lack. What aren't you, apparently, enough of? What isn't enough in you? Listen until the answer becomes stunningly clear to you. And now, very openly, and I would suggest that you don't provide a linguistic answer to this question, but just settle in the question itself. Now, very openly, consider with me the following. Without trying to be somebody, and without a presumed but incorrect sense of lack, who really are you? Once again, just listen. Without trying to be somebody or other, without a believed in but incorrect sense of lack, who or what really are you? Notice that what might be coming over you is a sense of peace, openness, calmness, or contentment. This is a key to understanding who you are. So continue the inquiry from here.